Okay, well, this is part 2 of an examination of this symposium given at the 2018 District Convention, a symposium covering the things to come, one of those things being the fall of Babylon the Great. So let's listen to another segment of this last brother from yesterday's Daily Word.
Now, Babylon the Great's destruction marks the beginning of the Great Tribulation. And Jesus indicated at Matthew 24, verse 22, that the attack on religion will be cut short. And the reason it'll be cut short is so that true religion is not destroyed.
I remember I started down this road more than 20 years ago, but it was exactly 20 years ago. I remember the congregation back, well, I won't say where it was, but it was during the Watchtower study. And the Watchtower routinely makes these statements. The tribulation will begin when Babylon the Great is destroyed. They say that over and over again. And they never give any scriptural proof. And I remember I was standing at the back of the Kingdom Hall during the Watchtower, and this paragraph was being read, and the presiding overseer was standing next to me, and I leaned over and I said, "Do you notice they didn't give any proof scriptures?" And he looked at me indignantly and said, "So?" And there you have it. Well, where does the Watchtower come up with this? Babylon the Great, the fall of Babylon the Great begins the Great Tribulation. Well, that's all based upon this notion that ancient Jerusalem, or the Jerusalem in Jesus' day, represents the worldwide system of false religion. And Jesus said that Jerusalem would be set upon, there would be a great tribulation. So that's the fall of Babylon the Great. Well, that's their scriptural proof. But where is the reasoning? Jerusalem was the city where Jehovah placed his name. And of course, it was destroyed on 2 occasions. Once, long before Jesus came, when the Babylonians destroyed it, that was when Jehovah specifically said that was where he had caused his name to reside. And then again, of course, the Romans destroyed it in 70 CE. But the reasoning of the Watchtower is that Jerusalem was apostate, and it was unholy in God's eyes, and so he destroyed it. Okay. Even so, how would Jerusalem represent all religions throughout the world, even non-Christian religions? Because that's what the Watchtower says Babylon the Great is. It doesn't make any sense. But not only that, the biggest problem with that line of reasoning, that Jerusalem was unholy, the problem with that is that the apostles didn't see it that way. And neither did Jesus. Jesus, of course, was a Jew from birth, and he kept the law. One of the first instances where we read of Jesus, other than his birth, is when he was a boy and his parents took him up to Jerusalem, and he was in the temple discussing deep scriptural matters with the older men, and they were amazed at his understanding. So he told his parents, "Did you not know that I must be in the house of my Father?" Which was the temple in Jerusalem. Jesus loved that temple. And the first thing he did when he started his ministry, when he went up to Jerusalem again for the festival, like I say, Jesus was a faithful Jew. He went to all the festivals. And he came up to the temple, and the first thing he did, he went into the temple threw out the money changers. He cleansed his father's temple. And he did it again on his last entry into Jerusalem 3 years later, that led up, of course, to his execution. Well, after Jesus died and was resurrected, of course, the apostles began preaching, and we know that God was transferring his support from Israel to this new Israel of God, the congregation of Christ. But did the apostles and those early Christians make a clean break from Judaism and get out of Babylon the Great? Did they recognize Jerusalem and the Holy Temple as this unclean thing? Far from it. Actually, you can read in the book of Acts that the apostles were in the temple every day preaching about Jesus Christ. So would they have been in the temple if they thought it was this unholy thing in God's eyes? Well, you have to excuse the traffic running by there. I live by sort of a busy road here. It's a country road, but in the morning, the trucks start rolling. I live by a gravel pit. I tried to get an early start, but you might hear them rolling by. Anyway, the Apostle Paul was called the Apostle to the Nations. And he was sort of a latecomer. He wasn't one of the 12, but he had been in the ministry, out in the field, in the nations. He came back to Jerusalem after his third missionary trip, which was probably 30 years into the Christian era. And the apostles had already made their ruling that those people of the nations becoming Christians didn't have to be circumcised, only to observe a few things, to abstain from idols and things sacrificed to idols and from blood. So Paul came back to Jerusalem, and the apostles said, well, listen, the Jewish brothers here are saying that you've been teaching an apostasy from the law of Moses among the nations. So in order to quell these rumors, do this. Take these men and go to the temple and make this ceremonial offering. Imagine that. The Apostle Paul, who wrote the Romans and Galatians, overturning this idea that Christians had to keep the law. And yet here he is going to the temple, which the Watchtower says is Babylon the Great. At what point did the early disciples get out of Babylon? Obviously they didn't. And they didn't view the temple as some unclean thing. Although the Jews made themselves unfaithful by not accepting Christ, and they would be punished, the temple would be destroyed, but only after it fulfilled God's purpose for it. There's a lot of Harleys around here too. People don't have mufflers on their cars. I think it's a sign of poverty, old cars, they just don't have $100 or $200 to fix the exhaust system. So where does that leave us with this? I would say that Paul is probably after his last trip to Jerusalem, he wrote his letter to the Hebrew Christians. And he was explaining all the details of the history of Israel and its significance of the law and how all of that foreshadowed Christ. And he was explaining these things to these Christians who were living in Jerusalem. The apostles had their headquarters in Jerusalem. He was explaining these things that, yes, the law and the temple service, it was God's arrangement, but it's served its purpose. And it's become obsolete, and it's near to passing away. And he explained to them, we do not have here in Jerusalem a city that remains. He explained to them, you have approached a heavenly Mount Zion. Jerusalem was built on series of hills, and one of them was called Mount Zion. So Paul was trying to prepare them for what Jesus had forewarned. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by encamped armies, in the book of Luke, Jesus said, they will build around you a fortification of pointed stakes. Get out before that happens, because once they surround you with the pointed stakes, you won't be able to leave. So Paul was preparing them. It wasn't going to be an act of unfaithfulness if they left Jerusalem, if they left the temple form of worship. So it was acceptable for Christians to be associated with the temple up until the disgusting thing appeared. And that was, of course, in the year 66 CE. The Romans came, and for some inexplicable reason, they started to undermine the temple, and then they left. And that was the signal for Christians to abandon Jerusalem and Judea. And then when the Romans came back, that was the Great Tribulation, a miniature. We know the Great Tribulation has a much farther reaching impact or importance, because Jesus said it would come in upon the entire inhabited earth. He said nothing like it has ever happened again, and nothing like has happened before, and nothing like will ever happen again. So it's an earth-shaking thing. So this business about Jerusalem and the temple being unholy is not true. What it does symbolize, though, is what the Watchtower represents. Jehovah's earthly organization. That's what Israel was. That's what the temple worship was. It was Jehovah's arrangement. It accomplished Jehovah's purpose. And after it did, God was done with it, moved on to the next phase. And that's the place of the Watchtower. It has served Jehovah's purpose. It has become corrupt, like the ancient Jewish religion in Jesus' day when he threw out the money changers. But it was still Jehovah's organization. That's why Jesus threw out the money changers, because he recognized that as his Father's house. So when Jesus spoke of, and the brother refers to Matthew 24:22, but the verses preceding that, Jesus said, therefore, when you see the disgusting thing standing in a holy place, that's when you flee. That was fulfilled in the first century, and we know it has an application now. Well, why would Jehovah Jesus represent Babylon as a holy place? The Watchtower says, well, they only claim to be holy. But again, that's not correct reasoning, because the brothers, as I've hopefully proven, they did not view the temple as an unholy thing from the time of Christ even up until 70, until the disgusting thing came. And that will be the signal for us in the future when the disgusting thing stands in a holy place. You know, the 8th chapter of Daniel speaks very similarly, using terms of the holy place, and this king, fierce in countenance, stands in this place and brings the holy ones to ruin. And yet the Watchtower claims that applies to the organization. But it was fulfilled back during World War II. So they've got things all twisted around. Now, the brother mentioned there, and I don't mean to disparage these convention speakers. They don't make this stuff up. As I say, we all know how it works. The Watchtower writes a script, and they hand it to these qualified brothers, and they read this manuscript. They're saying the message that comes from Bethel. And it's very uniform, scripted throughout all the conventions around the world. Well, yeah, he said that he said the tribulation would be cut short so that true religion could survive. Well, we won't argue with that, but it does raise the question. Jesus said, unless those days were cut short, no flesh would be saved. So, but he said, Jesus added, but those days will be cut short on account of the chosen ones. So if this tribulation is just the UN going against organized religion, how would that threaten the life of all humanity? There's something that's not quite right there. The Great Tribulation is not when the UN destroys Babylon the Great. It's the Great Tribulation is initiated when nations go to war. Going to Revelation, the 6th chapter, the unsealing of the 7 seals. The Watchtower reasonably says all of these seals were unsealed in rapid succession. And of course, they say the unsealing began in 1914. World War I. Second seal, Spanish influenza, food shortages, so forth. And the 6th seal was unsealed then. A great earthquake occurs, and the sun turns black as sackcloth, and the moon turns completely to blood, and all the stars of the heavens fall, and every mountain is shaken, and the islands. And people are terrified, and they run to the mountains and say, fall over us, protect us from the one seated on the throne. So earth-shaking, terrifying events. The Watchtower says, yeah, that was unsealed way back during World War I. There were preliminary tremblers, but the big one is coming. So all the seals were unsealed, but still we have not seen this tribulation. But now the way the world is, it's relatively stable, peaceful. People are driving by here, as I mentioned. They've got jobs, they're going to work, carrying on business, eating, drinking, planting, buying, selling. Jesus said that they will be carrying on like that, just as they were in Noah's day, so it will be in the presence of the Son of Man. The Watchtower says, yeah, the presence has been going on for 100 years. And still business as usual, people buying, selling, eating, marrying, being given in marriage. Now we're looking at the future coming of Christ and the presence, and initiates war, food shortage, pestilence, literal earthquakes. When the missiles start flying, friends, this system will just explode. You think you'll be able to carry on business as usual, go to work? You won't have a job probably. Go to an ATM, get some money, go shopping, forget it. That's why people will be terrified. What did Jesus say? Men will be faint out of fear in expectation of the things coming upon the world. Well, the Watchtower, I will say they picked an appropriate theme, be courageous, because that's what Jesus said. Do not you be terrified, because it's going to be terrifying. People are going to be scared out of their minds when this system blows with the coming of Christ. And I suspect Jehovah's Witnesses will be a little wobbly too, trying to get their mind around how they could have been so deceived. To nail this point down about Jerusalem symbolizing Jehovah's earthly organization, Christian congregation, if you want, and not Christendom, and certainly not Babylon the Great, I would like to share one scriptural passage, and this is in the 29th chapter of Isaiah. It starts off, woe to Ariel, Ariel, the city where David encamped. Continue year after year, let the cycle of festivals continue. But I will bring distress on Ariel, and there will be mourning and lamentation, and she will become to me like an altar hearth of God. Now listen to this next verse. I will encamp on all sides against you, and I will besiege you with a palisade and raise up siege works against you. You will be brought low. From the ground you will speak, and what you say will be muffled by dust. Your voice will come from the ground, like the voice of a spirit medium, and your words will chirp from the dust. Ariel is a symbol for Jerusalem. That's the city where David encamped. After the Israelites came into the promised land, there were pockets and areas where they had not removed the Canaanites and the other tribes. And so after David became king, he marched on Jerusalem. It was held by the Jebusites, and he took it wasn't called Jerusalem then, I don't think, but it became known as the city of David. And so, but what's it really talking about? Jehovah says, I will encamp against you and besiege you with a palisade. What is a palisade? It is a fence with pointed stakes. Exactly what Jesus said in regards to Jerusalem being besieged. But of course, if you read the rest of the prophecy, it has no relevance to the first century. In context, it's talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And what is represented by Ariel, which is, as I say, Jehovah's earthly organization, Christ's congregation, he's the greater David. Jehovah will besiege it. In other words, he will let his enemies besiege it. He will use them to accomplish his purpose. And that's what it goes on to say there in that 29th chapter. Jehovah is going to do something wonderful in connection with his besieged people. He has to get their attention first, though. Jehovah's Witnesses might find this really hard to accept because they've been conditioned that Jehovah's mouthpiece, this faithful and wise, discreet servant, will tell them everything they need to know. In fact, the Watchtower subtly inculcates this, that during the tribulation, you will receive life-saving instructions from Jehovah's organization. Be obedient, be prepared to do whatever the governing body tells you, even if it seems unreasonable. Now, I'm not going to show a video segment of this, but there's a video connected with this symposium. And I found it really a bit disturbing, actually. It showed a Kingdom Hall setting, and these sisters were looking on the information board, and they realized that they were being sent out to other congregations. And they found it hard to accept. They couldn't understand why. And they asked this elderly sister, well, what are you going to do? Because your relatives, your niece or whatever, they're going to this congregation and you're going over here. What are you going to do? She goes, what do you mean, what am I going to do? I'm going to obey and follow Jehovah's direction. Well, that's fine. Paul said, be submissive to those taking the lead. But the question is, I know I'm going off the tangent here, why is the congregation disbanding and being dispersed? Because over the course of the last few years, the Watchtower has been selling kingdom halls. If the attendance seems a little bit down and maybe they can't consolidate a couple of congregations within that kingdom hall, they tell everybody, get out of here. You go here, you go there. We're selling this place. The brothers built it. They paid for it. The Watchtower owns it. They do whatever they want with it. They're selling it, taking the money, doing something with it. And so that's theocratic direction. We tell you what to do. Don't question it. That's a lot of authority they have there. But the question is, why does not this faithful and discreet slave understand these things? Why are they so off base in the area of the things to come, as is showcased in this symposium? I mean, I credit the Watchtower for teaching me the truth. They brought things to light that are absolutely true. I use their teaching tools. I consult the Insight book on a daily basis. It's wonderful. But yet they can't understand these things. Why? The 29th chapter of Isaiah explains it. Verse 9. Be stunned and amazed. Blind yourselves and be blinded. They are drunk, but not with wine. They are staggering, but not from alcohol. For Jehovah has poured a spirit of deep sleep on you. He has closed your eyes, the prophets, and he has covered your heads, the visionaries. It goes on, for every vision for you will be like words of a sealed book. When they give it to someone who can read, saying, read this out loud, please, he will say, I cannot, for it is sealed up. And when they give the book to someone who cannot read, saying, read this, please, he will say, I cannot read at all. Well, it goes on to point out that Jehovah says, this people approaches me with their mouth and they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far removed from me, and their fear is based on commands of men that they've been taught. Obey the slave, go here, go there, little here, little there. Eh? So, if you read in the Hebrew scriptures, Jehovah let things come upon the Israelites, and it said Jehovah he was testing them. It said he wanted to find out what was in their heart. He said God doesn't make us do anything. That's the beauty of being a free moral agent. Jehovah gives us all this freedom to make decisions, to decide what we're going to believe and accept and how we'll interact with him. But of course, there's responsibility with that, as I have said. So Jehovah has this arrangement, this organization of teachers, but he blinds them to certain things. And he does so, to test what's in our heart. Now, I'd like to read one more verse for you. As I said, Jehovah intends to do something wonderful with this people who are being led by these blinded, spiritually drunken leaders. He says, therefore, this is verse 14, I am the one who will again do wonderful things with this people, with wonder upon wonder, and the wisdom of their wise men will perish, and the understanding of their discreet men will be hidden. He's talking about the faithful, wise servant, the faithful and discreet men. He says the understanding of their discreet men will be hidden. Well, the Watchtower boasts of being in the truth, but that truth will only take you up to a certain point. And that is hidden. The future judgments are hidden. And the men who are serving as prophets and visionaries cannot see it. They do not understand the prophecies in Isaiah. And they've written 2 volumes on it, and they explain a lot about the ancient history and the fulfillments and all. That's all good information. And then they apply it in a totally wrong way. All the negative prophecies, oh, that's Christendom. And they take a few prophets, oh, that's us. They're blind and they're drunk. It doesn't mean necessarily they've lost God's favor. He allows them to take this course. He doesn't open their eyes. I've been trying to get through to these guys for 20 years. I mean, it's like talking to a Trinitarian. And actually, Trinitarians, I think some of them are more reasonable. But they think that upholding the Watchtower's dogma is the same as being loyal to Jehovah. Anyway, Jehovah wants to find out what is in our hearts. And it's going to take a big test when this war breaks out, and it'll lead into the tribulation. And the tribulation is cut short. That's what begins this 3.5-year period. And the chosen ones are finally sealed, and they do a special work during that period, and that's when the sheep and goats are separated and all that. But Jehovah has to get our attention first, because we don't really listen to him like we should. Doesn't that, the scripture I read, they bless me with their mouths and their lips, but their hearts are far removed. Isn't that Jehovah's Witnesses? Don't they bless Jehovah? They speak about the name of Jehovah. We pray to Jehovah. We witness about Jehovah. We're Jehovah's Witnesses. But Jehovah sees what the heart is, and he sees that maybe we're not complete towards him. And if that's the case, wouldn't you like to be made complete toward him? So I think it's appropriate, timely, food at the right time, if you want to call it that. At least the overall convention theme, be courageous, because what is coming, as I say, is going to be terrifying, and it's going to require all the faith and courage we can muster to work our way through it. Thanks for watching today's Daily Word. Lord willing, we'll do this again tomorrow.